Did you know that one of the most shocking moments inside the royal family was never meant to leave palace walls? It was not a public argument. It was not a leaked letter. And it was not a television interview. It was a private confrontation involving Prince Edward, Queen Camilla, and a royal brooch that witnesses say was torn away in the middle of a furious palace dispute. Even more surprising, insiders claimed the clash happened during secret talks about the future coronation of Prince William. And if those reports were true, it meant the royal family was already fighting over a ceremony that had not even happened yet. But why would Edward try to stop Camilla from being there? And what did that ripped brooch reveal about the monarchy's deepest fracture? For most of his life, Prince Edward was known as the quiet one. He was rarely the royal making front-page headlines. He did not chase attention. And unlike other members of the family, he often stayed far away from public controversy. That was exactly why palace insiders were stunned when his name suddenly became linked to one of the most whispered-about confrontations inside royal walls. Because according to reports that quietly spread through royal circles, Edward had done something almost unthinkable. He had stood in the way of Queen Camilla. And not during a casual family disagreement. This was said to have happened during a private discussion about the future coronation of Prince William. That alone was enough to send shockwaves through the palace. Very few people realize that discussions about future royal ceremonies can begin years before they ever happen. Every detail matters. Every appearance sends a message. And every family member knows that even standing in the wrong place can become a royal statement. That was what made this moment so explosive. Sources claimed the tension began when conversations turned to who would have a visible role when William one day takes the throne. Camilla reportedly believed her place at that event was unquestionable. After all, she had spent years rebuilding her public image. Years proving she belonged. Years slowly earning acceptance inside an institution that had once resisted her. But Edward may have seen things very differently. Some insiders believed he felt William's future reign needed a fresh beginning. A different image. A cleaner chapter. A monarchy less connected to old controversies that had haunted the family for decades. Then came the moment no one expected. During the heated exchange, witnesses claimed a royal brooch pinned to Camilla's outfit was suddenly torn loose. The room reportedly fell silent. For a second, nobody moved. It was not just the shock of what happened. It was the meaning behind it. Because in royal life, jewelry is never just jewelry. Many royal brooches carry history. Some symbolize loyalty. Others represent status inside the family. And if one had truly been ripped away during an argument, some believed it symbolized something much deeper. A family that was no longer hiding its fractures. The palace never confirmed the story. No statement was made. No denial was fully given. And no one involved ever spoke publicly. But that silence only made the whispers stronger. Because sometimes in the royal family, what is not said becomes louder than anything spoken. And if Edward really tried to block Camilla from William's future coronation, the question was no longer whether the family was divided. The real question was why. At first, the story sounded almost impossible to believe. Prince Edward challenging Camilla behind palace doors was already shocking enough. But what made the rumor even more unsettling was the reason some insiders claimed was behind it. Because according to those whispers, this was never just about one coronation. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. For years, royal watchers have seen Prince Edward as one of the least controversial members of the family. He rarely speaks out. He rarely complains. And unlike some royals, he has spent decades protecting the institution instead of fighting against it. That is why some believed that if Edward truly objected, he must have had a reason far bigger than personal dislike. A lesser-known fact about Edward is that he has often been described by former staff as one of the most observant royals in private. He may not speak often, but he notices everything. He watched the monarchy struggle after the death of Princess Diana. He watched public trust collapse. And he watched younger royals slowly prepare for a very different future. Some palace sources claimed Edward had become increasingly protective of Prince William over the years. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly. William represented stability. He represented the next chapter. And according to some insiders, Edward believed that chapter needed to begin without the shadows of old royal controversies standing beside it. That was where Queen Camilla entered the picture. Even after becoming queen, Camilla remained a deeply complicated figure to parts of the public. Many had accepted her. Some had forgiven her. But not everyone had forgotten the painful history surrounding her relationship with King Charles. And inside the palace, those memories may have lingered longer than anyone admitted. According to one persistent royal rumor, a private planning conversation had taken place among senior family members about how William's future reign should look. The topic was not just ceremonial. It was symbolic. Who would stand on the balcony? Who would appear in official portraits? Who would be seated closest to the throne? To ordinary people, those details may sound small. Inside royal life, they can mean everything. Because position inside the monarchy often reveals power no one speaks about openly. That was when some believed Camilla made it clear she expected to remain part of the royal center, even after Charles. And that, according to insiders, was the moment Edward pushed back. Not because he wanted conflict, but because he believed the monarchy could not move forward while still carrying the weight of its oldest divisions. Another surprising fact is that royal family disagreements are often managed through private secretaries long before relatives confront each other directly. That means if Edward and Camilla truly argued face-to-face, tensions may have been building for much longer than anyone knew. Weeks. Maybe months. Possibly years. Then came the reported brooch incident. Some sources claimed the brooch itself carried symbolic meaning. It was said to be a piece associated with royal continuity, a subtle reminder of status, legacy, and belonging. If true, that made the moment even more explosive. Because what looked like a simple torn accessory may actually have represented a challenge to authority. And once that happened, the private disagreement could no longer stay private. Because inside the palace, people talk. Staff notice everything. Aides remember details. And even silence can spread stories. Soon, speculation began moving far beyond palace walls. And once the media sensed there was trouble inside the royal household, the story was about to become much bigger than anyone expected. Because what happened next would turn a private family clash into a public royal storm. And by then, the palace may already have realized the truth was becoming impossible to contain. The royal family has always understood one dangerous truth. A private problem can become a public disaster in a single day. And once rumors about the confrontation between Prince Edward and Queen Camilla began to leak, the palace knew exactly what could happen next. At first, it was only whispers. A quiet mention from a former staff member. A brief comment from a royal watcher. A strange social media post hinting that something serious had happened behind closed doors. Then the story started spreading. People online began asking the same question. Why would Edward try to stop Camilla from attending the future coronation of Prince William? That question alone was enough to ignite global curiosity. Because royal stories are rarely just about family. They are about power. And when power appears to shift inside the monarchy, the world pays attention. Within hours, royal commentators began discussing the alleged incident. Some dismissed it as gossip. Others quietly admitted the story sounded believable. That was what made it dangerous. Because the public had seen this pattern before. One lesser-known fact about the royal household is that senior staff often monitor media coverage hour by hour during a potential scandal. Every headline is studied. Every public reaction is measured. Every phrase is carefully analyzed. That means the palace likely understood very quickly that this story could not simply disappear. The problem was not just the brooch. It was what the brooch seemed to represent. A symbol of royal authority. A sign of belonging. And now, according to rumors, a symbol of rejection. Some newspapers avoided the story completely. Others hinted at deepening tensions within the royal household. Television commentators began discussing the possibility of a hidden divide between older royals and the next generation. And social media made everything worse. Because once millions of people begin creating their own version of a royal scandal, the truth becomes harder to control. Some believed Edward was defending William's future. Others believed Camilla was being unfairly targeted. And many people believed the palace was hiding something much bigger. That is what made the story grow. Not facts, but silence. The royal family has often survived scandals by refusing to react. Sometimes that strategy works. But history shows it can also backfire. After the death of Princess Diana in 1997, the royal family faced heavy criticism for appearing cold and distant. Many historians now believe that crisis changed how the palace handles media forever. From that moment on, image became everything. That was why this new controversy felt especially serious. Because it suggested the family might once again be losing control of the narrative. Behind the scenes, advisors reportedly moved quickly. Some wanted a firm denial. Others believed responding would only make the story bigger. That created another problem. The palace itself may not have agreed on how to handle the scandal. And when the people protecting the monarchy cannot agree, even a rumor can become a crisis. As reporters continued digging, another unsettling detail began to surface. Some insiders claimed this was not the first disagreement over Camilla's future role. It may have simply been the first one dramatic enough to leak. If that was true, the public had only seen the surface. Because hidden behind the polished smiles and carefully staged appearances, a deeper struggle may already have been unfolding inside the House of Windsor. And what no one knew yet was whether the royal family had a secret ally in the press, or whether even that protection was beginning to disappear. By the time the rumors spread beyond palace walls, the real damage may already have been done. Because royal scandals are rarely destroyed by the public first. They are usually damaged from within. And if the reports about the confrontation were true, then the argument between Prince Edward and Queen Camilla was not simply a personal disagreement. It was a sign of something deeper. A family divide that had been quietly growing for years. To the outside world, the royal family often appears united. They stand together on balconies. They smile during ceremonies. They wave as though everything is perfectly calm. But royal historians often say that some of the monarchy's most serious conflicts happened in silence long before the public ever noticed. And this may have been one of those moments. One of the most surprising things about royal life is how much meaning is attached to loyalty. Not just public loyalty. Private loyalty. Who defends whom? Who stays silent? Who chooses a side without ever saying a word? According to some palace insiders, Edward had slowly become one of the strongest quiet supporters of Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales. That may have surprised many people. Edward was never seen as a political player. He was rarely viewed as influential. But inside the family, influence does not always come from being loud. Sometimes it comes from trust. And trust inside the monarchy can be more powerful than a title. William, according to long-standing reports, has wanted a smaller and more modern monarchy. Less drama. Less excess. Fewer complications. That vision may not have matched what some older royals expected. Camilla had spent years securing her place in the institution. Her rise had been slow, careful, and deeply controversial. Many believed she had worked hard to become accepted after decades of criticism tied to the memory of Princess Diana. That made any suggestion of exclusion deeply sensitive. Because to Camilla, it may not have felt like a scheduling issue. It may have felt like rejection. Some royal commentators believe the tension may have gone beyond just Edward. They suspect other family members may have quietly shared concerns about how visible Camilla should remain in the next reign. But in royal life, disagreement is rarely spoken aloud. It appears in smaller ways. A shorter conversation. A missed invitation. A changed seating arrangement. A colder expression at a public event. Those subtle signals can say more than words. One little-known fact is that royal seating plans are sometimes reviewed repeatedly before major events. Not for comfort. For symbolism. Who sits close to whom can reveal alliances the public was never meant to notice. That is why some observers looked back at recent royal appearances and began noticing unusual patterns. Who stood beside William? Who stood beside Charles? And who seemed just slightly more distant than before? Then came another troubling rumor. Some sources claimed that after the alleged confrontation, communication between certain members of the family became noticeably strained. Not openly hostile. Just different. Conversations reportedly became shorter. Meetings became more formal. And some family gatherings reportedly felt colder than before. Inside ordinary families, tension can stay hidden. Inside a royal family, even silence can become a headline. And perhaps the most shocking part was this. Some believed King Charles III may have known there was growing tension long before the public heard anything. That possibility changed everything. Because if Charles knew, then the conflict was not simply between Edward and Camilla. It may have been part of a larger struggle over what the monarchy should become after him. And history has shown this before. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from royal life, the world saw how quickly family disagreements could become institutional crises. When Diana separated from Charles, private pain eventually became global scandal. The monarchy has faced these fractures before, but each time, the wounds left permanent scars. That is why this alleged clash felt different. It was not just about one future ceremony. It was about whether the next generation was already preparing to redraw the lines inside the royal family. And if that was true, the scandal was far from over. Because the deeper the family divide became, the more dangerous the consequences could be. And behind closed palace doors, some feared an even bigger revelation was still waiting to surface. Once the story moved beyond palace whispers, the problem was no longer just personal. It became constitutional. And that is when the royal household had to confront something it fears more than scandal itself: public distrust. Because if the reports were true, that Prince Edward had objected to Queen Camilla taking part in the future coronation of Prince William, then the question was suddenly much larger than family tension. Could a senior royal actually be excluded from one of the monarchy's most sacred ceremonies? And if so, who would have the legal authority to decide? That question immediately created concern among royal experts. Many people assume a coronation is simply a family tradition. It is not. A coronation is also a constitutional event. It involves the government. It involves the church. And it involves centuries of carefully protected royal protocol. Every person present in that room sends a message. Every title matters. Every appearance can carry political meaning. That is why even the suggestion of excluding Camilla caused such intense discussion. Some legal commentators pointed out that a future king has broad control over the tone of his own coronation. But tradition can still limit what appears possible. And royal tradition often becomes a legal gray area. One lesser-known fact is that many royal customs are not written into law at all. They survive through precedent. That means some of the monarchy's most important rules exist simply because previous monarchs followed them. And once a future king changes one tradition, it can quietly reshape the institution forever. That possibility made the palace nervous. Because if William eventually chose to reduce Camilla's role, it could signal a dramatic shift in royal hierarchy. Not just emotionally. Legally, the royal household reportedly understood how dangerous that conversation could become. Because the public was already asking difficult questions. Was Camilla fully accepted inside the family? Was Edward acting alone? And was William quietly supporting changes no one was ready to discuss publicly? The palace could ignore gossip, but it could not ignore public perception. A monarchy survives on ceremony, but it survives even more on legitimacy. And legitimacy can weaken when people begin to believe the family itself no longer agrees on who belongs. As the rumors spread, social media became brutal. Some defended Camilla fiercely. They argued she had spent years rebuilding her place after decades of criticism. Others believed Edward had voiced what many still quietly felt. That old royal wounds had never truly healed. That made the backlash deeply divided. And for the palace, division is dangerous. Because a divided public can quickly become a divided institution. Some commentators even began revisiting old royal legal controversies. One surprising historical fact is that royal titles and roles have often changed after family disputes. When Edward VIII abdicated in 1936, the monarchy had to create new legal arrangements almost overnight. When Princess Diana divorced Charles, her title changed in a way that deeply affected her status. And when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back, the palace had to carefully redefine their public role. Royal family conflict has often forced legal adaptation. That is what made this story feel serious. Because people began wondering whether another shift was coming. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually. Behind closed doors, advisors were reportedly focused on one urgent task: containment. Public relations teams are trained for this exact kind of crisis. They know when to deny. They know when to stay silent. And they know when silence becomes more suspicious than a statement. That may have been the palace's biggest mistake. Because the absence of a clear response gave the story room to grow. And once speculation fills an empty space, it becomes very hard to stop. Then the personal consequences began. Because beyond protocol and headlines, this scandal may have changed relationships inside the family itself. Some reports suggested Edward became more distant. Others claimed Camilla felt deeply humiliated by the rumors. And some believed Charles was placed in an impossible position between his wife and his brother. That may have been the most painful part. Because royal scandals rarely stay in public. Eventually, they come home. And when they do, even a family trained for generations to hide emotion can begin to fracture. But as damaging as the public backlash became, some insiders feared something even worse was still ahead. Because if this was only the beginning of a power struggle over the next reign, then the monarchy had not yet reached its most dangerous moment. By this point, the story was no longer just a rumor whispered inside royal circles. It had become something bigger. A narrative the public could not fully unhear. And whether it was entirely accurate or partly exaggerated, the idea that Prince Edward had opposed the role of Queen Camilla in the future coronation of Prince William had already done its job. It forced attention onto the most sensitive subject inside the monarchy: the future. According to palace insiders, the royal household's biggest priority quickly became stopping the story from growing any further. Not because they wanted to hide drama, but because they understood how quickly perception can turn into belief. And belief can shape history. Officially, no statement confirmed the confrontation. No admission was made. And no direct denial ever fully addressed the most explosive details. That silence left space for interpretation. And in royal history, silence is never empty. It fills itself with suspicion. Inside the palace, advisors reportedly worked behind the scenes to stabilize relationships. Private conversations were encouraged. Tensions were carefully managed. And public appearances continued as if nothing unusual had happened. But behind the polished image, something had changed. Because even unspoken conflict leaves traces. Some insiders suggested Edward became noticeably more withdrawn in certain settings. Not openly defiant. Just quieter. More distant. Meanwhile, Camilla reportedly continued her royal duties with the same public composure she had maintained for years. But royal observers noted something important. Perception had shifted. And in monarchy, perception is power. One lesser-known truth about royal institutions is that they are constantly adapting, even when they appear unchanging. Titles evolve. Roles shift. Responsibilities are quietly redistributed. Nothing is ever truly fixed. That is why the idea of a future coronation involving a reduced or reshaped royal presence did not feel impossible to some observers. It felt predictable. Because modern monarchies across Europe have already shown signs of slimming down ceremonial structures. And Prince William has long been associated with a more modern, streamlined vision of royal life. Less formality. Fewer working royals. More focus on public trust. That vision, whether accurate or not, added fuel to speculation. Because if change was already coming, then disagreements about who belongs at the center of that change suddenly mattered more. Some royal analysts believe this entire episode, real or rumored, revealed something important. The monarchy is not just preparing for succession. It is preparing for transformation. And transformation always creates tension. The alleged Brooch incident, often repeated in whispers, became symbolic of that tension. A small object turned into a metaphor. Something delicate being pulled apart under pressure. Even if no physical moment ever happened exactly as described, the story reflected something emotionally real for many observers. A sense that unity inside the royal family is no longer automatic. And that is what makes the narrative powerful. Because whether or not the confrontation occurred exactly as told, the reaction to it revealed something undeniable. People are no longer certain how stable the monarchy feels behind closed doors. And uncertainty is where speculation grows. In the final analysis, the palace may never need to officially address the story. Because over time, attention will move elsewhere. New headlines will emerge. New controversies will appear. and the cycle will continue. But some stories leave a longer shadow. They change how people interpret everything that comes after. And this one may have done exactly that. Because now, every future appearance of the royal family will be watched more closely. Every seating arrangement will be analyzed. Every smile will be questioned. Every absence will feel meaningful. And that brings us to the final question. Was this simply a rumor that grew too large? Or was it an early glimpse into a deeper shift inside the House of Windsor? The answer, for now, remains behind palace doors. But history suggests one thing clearly. When royal families change, they rarely announce it in advance. They reveal it slowly, through moments the public only understands later. And if this story is one of those moments, then what comes next may already be unfolding quietly, out of sight. Whether this story is viewed as rumor, speculation, or hidden truth, it highlights something that has always defined the monarchy. Change never arrives gently. It arrives through tension, disagreement, and silence that speaks louder than words. The idea of Edward challenging Camilla's future role may or may not be fully accurate, but it reflects a larger truth people are increasingly interested in. What does the monarchy become in its next chapter? As Prince William moves closer to the throne, expectations rise, traditions are questioned, and every royal decision carries greater weight. And that is why stories like this capture attention. Not just because of scandal, but because they hint at transformation. So what do you think? Was this a real royal fracture behind closed doors? Or just another story amplified by silence? Do you think the royal family will ever fully escape internal divisions like this? And what would happen if the next reign quietly reshapes everything we think we know about the crown? If you want more royal secrets and untold stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more expose content.